Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Trustee Chang?
Here.
Trustee Foster is absent at the moment. Trustee Flora?
Here.
Trustee McKnight?
Here.
Mayor Newhart?
Here.
Stephen Gaba?
Present.
And so tonight is a work session, March 18, 2024, and it's to discuss two topics. One is the draft short-term rental code, and the other is the draft code of ethics, and both we've been working on for quite some time, and I'm hoping maybe we can tie it in a bow tonight, but we'll see. So, Steve, do you want to give us some? Do you want to be our guide?
Sure. Well, we've gone over the draft ethics code with Trustee Lindberg, former Trustee Lindberg's changes, and my proposed edits. And I believe I discussed it with the board. And then earlier this month, you had a work session or meeting at which you discussed it further. And as far as I can tell, because Barry's the only one I heard from, the only change, or at least substantive change, was regarding making the ethics code applicable to candidates for elected village positions.
Okay.
Now, you guys discussed this, so you know better than I do as far as that goes. But it looks to me, if I'm reading it correctly, like to the only extent to which you've made the ethics code applicable to candidates for office is requiring them to submit a standard disclosure sheet. Have I got that right or not? Or?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
We just started.
I don't see a practical problem with that, and I would think that anyone running for office in the village would be willing to fill out your standard disclosure sheet. Certainly it's a bad look for candidates if they were unwilling to do that. And the standard disclosure sheet is pretty straightforward. What do you have interest in? Do you have any contracts with the village? That type of thing. Having said that, I question whether you can impose conditions on candidates for elected office. If somebody said, I'm not going to fill this out, it wouldn't disqualify them for running for office. And if they refused to fill it out as a candidate as opposed to an elected official, I question whether you would be able to bring disciplinary proceedings against them. Having said all that, once they're elected, they gotta submit the sheet anyway, and if they're not elected, it doesn't really much matter if they submit the sheet. So I can't imagine this type of thing turning into litigation. I think if you enact it, you should, assuming this is where you wanna go, get where you wanna go, but be aware in doing it that it's more of an ask than it is a demand, notwithstanding that it's written into your code.
So it's an ask at a certain point when somebody's running for office.
Yeah, I mean, look, again, as a practical matter, people who run for office rarely read the village code before they, some are going to be more versed in it, some are going to be less versed in it as far as that goes. Obviously, the people who are being reelected are familiar with the village code, but if you're somebody new coming in, you may not be aware that this is a requirement at all. So what if you want this to happen, if you want it to have effect, you're going to want to do is put somewhere on your website or maybe send out a note when people actually accept their party's nomination. Please fill out the enclosed disclosure sheet as per village code section, whatever it is. And again, I think 99% of the time people are going to fill it out and submit it. There's always that one, but again, as a practical matter, that may not come to anything, because if they're elected, they'll be filing it right away anyway, and if they're not, you just let the matter drop.
Well, and everything gets shared with the clerk in any case, like that whole, all the paperwork and everything has to go through the clerk.
It's true.
Yeah.
So that, during that exchange, that handout can be shared. So they wouldn't have to. That's good.
Yeah, they should be notified that it's a requirement.
Yeah, there's a whole section on the website that says running for office with everything laid out on it.
Yeah, you could just add it to there, you're absolutely right.
But I believe the clerk sends a letter to the people who have filed petitions and had not had them challenged, that requires them to sign a certificate of acceptance. And so the way I had structured it was to have the disclosure statement submitted with the certificate of acceptance. And as you well pointed out, if they submit just the certificate of acceptance without the disclosure form completed, there's not a whole heck of a lot we as a village board or the clerk can do about it, except say it's not here. And then I guess it's up to the candidates themselves to make it an issue in the process of the time that
No.
leads up to the vote.
When they do submit it, is it something that the public has access to? Do they have to file a FOIL, or is it going to be posted somewhere?
Well, some
Rather
boards
than-
post their disclosure sheets on their website just as a transparency thing. Most do not, and if somebody wanted to foil them, they could foil them. Any personal information which would constitute an undue invasion of privacy would have to be redacted, but the rest of the sheet would go out, and the same rule would hold true for candidates for office.
The county has, theirs are published on the website, on their website, so you can go in and find out all about me.
The only thing I feel a little strange about is if somebody does not do it, then there's no recourse, and so, I don't know, what does that, it puts us in a limbo of sorts.
Well, you're right, there is no recourse, but if someone's running for office and they refuse to file a disclosure sheet, I would think that, assuming that they're not running unopposed or something, your opponent's going to make hay out of that as far as why wouldn't you fill out this disclosure sheet? What's
True.
the issue here? It's not a good look, as I said, so it's kind of self-enforcing in that sense. Of course, like I said, there's always that one, there's gonna be someone, it's a privacy issue, I have to stand on my rights on this, the village's undue, requirements are, not something I'm gonna put up with. You're gonna have to deal with that kind of thing, but again, if you want this, I think you can get where you wanna go. I don't think you're gonna get sued over it. I think if you were sued, you'd have a legitimate argument as far as, we think it's inappropriate as an ethics matter, not as an election matter. Not like we'd leave them off the ballot, they can be on the ballot, but we feel that they're violating our ethics code.
Is it, so for Orange County, it's required of candidates?
Yes.
And what is the recourse? Is it the same?
I don't believe there is one, no.
Yeah, so it's just I think it also makes sense for us to be consistent with the county. Just,
I mean, I think it's a part of what the county does that should be applicable at this level as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
I don't have a problem with it, and I don't have a problem with being consistent with the county, but you can't read across counties to villages, they're just different animals.
Yeah,
So,
no,
I mean, in this particular instance, again, but you don't want to mirror the county and everything, it's just a different.
right, in this particular instance.
So are there any other questions about the ethics code? Anything else you want to discuss on it?
One of the other things I brought up you didn't mention was a better definition for the gifts.
What you have in mind?
Well, right now it's, a one-time $75, which if somebody were to give a candidate from one source, if somebody were to give a candidate 75, that doesn't preclude anyone from giving a candidate $75 a day for a year, which is $20,000 over the course of a year.
Yeah, I think I incorporated your language.
You did? Okay. I
Where is that?
It's subsection, it's F under 9-4. And it reads, gifts. No village officer or employee shall directly or indirectly solicit any gift or accept or receive any gift having an aggregate value of $75 or more in any 12-month consecutive period from the same individual or entity, nor shall he/she accept or solicit any gift or financial benefit under circumstances in which it could be reasonably inferred that the gift was intended to influence such village officer or employee in the performance of his/her official duties, or was intended to be a reward for any official action taken on his/her part. I'm not wild about that last one because somebody does a good job for someone and they want to thank them with, you know, a nice bottle of scotch or something like that. You know, it could be, you got to turn it down under this, and I understand that. You don't want to have a front end payment, you want to have a back end payment. I'm just saying it could come back to have some unintended consequences.
I mean, the only change I suggested was the 12-month consecutive period. That wasn't in there.
Right.
Okay. Provided, however, that this section should not apply to legally obtained campaign contributions or in-kind services. So if you guys want to modify the language, that's fine. If you want to leave it like it is, it's certainly perfectly acceptable as phrased.
Next. So,
That's all I
well,
got, guys.
no, staggered terms, and I know I had
Oh, yeah, all right.
suggested, you know, that there be staggered terms for each of the 5 members, so that, primarily so that a new board couldn't come in and basically disband the entire ethics board, which is what could happen if it were, and Steve made, you know, good points to the contrary.
You can have it either way. It's you guys' decision as far as that goes. It's 9(6) sub C. Appointments of the Board of Ethics shall be made at the annual reorganization village board meeting. So you have 5 members. You know, you could give them a length of term, 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is suits you. And then some of them would be initially appointed for just 1 year or 2 years, depending on how you do it. Others would be initially appointed for 3 years or what have you. So you'd have board members coming in and out. Again, Bear makes a good point. If you had a nefarious board who wanted to turn things over and got your ethics board, that could well happen. But, I mean, how many ethics claims have you had or even heard of while you were here? I mean, even on my other towns, I gotta tell you, it comes up once in a blue moon that there's a question as far as that sort of thing goes. There's not much occasion to, because of, let me take a step back. Boards of ethics do not accept and investigate ethics complaints directly from the public, or even from officers of the village or other municipalities, at least not if they're properly, if the code is properly written. And the reason for that is it's so easy to politicize or weaponize a board of ethics and have complaint after complaint coming in from people, especially around election time. I know you guys are a little bit more calm out here, but there are, I assure you, municipalities where things get mighty nasty, mighty quick, and that sort of thing happens. And the way that you have it set up, and the way most municipalities have it set up to avoid exactly that type of thing, is that any officer or elected official of the village, or even employees to some extent, can send in a question for a determination about whether a particular activity they're interested in presents an ethical problem. You know, I'll take my crazy bottle of scotch example at the end there. We did a great job plowing the roadways, and Mr. Jones feels that it saved him time and trouble getting his wife to the hospital when she was pregnant, and he wants to thank the DPW superintendent with a nice bottle of scotch, which is worth $85. You know, can I take this? And your Board of Ethics would look into it and say, no, as the code is written, very sorry, but you cannot. So they give an opinion on that, and it's a good thing to have because you can get ethics opinions before you take action, and it kind of makes you bulletproof when you actually go to do it, because it's like, hey, I asked, they said I could do this, or I asked and they said I couldn't, and that's the way that it goes. When you actually do have a complaint that comes in, you know, someone's stealing supplies, or, you know, did some other thing which would be improper, it goes to the village board conducts an initial investigation, the village board then, if it feels it's proper, refers it to the Board of Ethics for review and recommendation as to what action should be taken, because the Board of Ethics itself cannot take any punitive action, rather it recommends it, and then this board would do it. So it's kind of a long-winded way of saying that you're not really going to have very many, I mean, once in a million years, occasions where your village board would want to gut your board of ethics. In fact, your problems are going to be finding people who are willing to sit as a board of ethics. They're supposed to meet once a year. They're supposed to look at the disclosure forms that come in and report to the village board. They're supposed to make any recommendations they may feel are appropriate for changes to your ethics code. That's pretty much all they do. And it's hard to find people, at least in my experience it is, who are willing to sit on that type of a rarely active board. And not for nothing, unless it's politicized or weaponized, a board of ethics is kind of, it's not a I'm really involved in the community type of thing. You're on the planning board, you're on the zoning board, things are coming before you, you're plugged in. Not so much with the board of ethics. So I don't think the thing you're concerned about is something that's going to occur very often. But again, this is your decision. If you want to appoint people every year, that's great. If you want to set them up for terms, I will say this about terms. When people agree to serve for a term, generally speaking, they want to stay on for the term. You know, they don't like to quit the term early. If it's a 3-year term, they're going to stay there the 3 years before they start saying, should I re-up, should I not re-up? If you have people that are being reappointed every year, it's easier for them to say, you know what, I got other things to do, find somebody else next year. So if you're interested in retaining your Board of Ethics members, it's something you may want to consider as far as terms. And if you're going to do terms, you probably should do staggered terms, as Barry points out.
Personally, I like the idea of staggered terms because while, you know, we don't have anybody that might behave in such a way now, we want to have a framework to mitigate the risk in the future or at any point in time. So that's my perspective.
Yeah, I
agree.
feel the same. Yeah.
Well, if that is how you feel, how long of terms would you like?
5 year. It's a 5-member board, 5 years, 1 a year.
That makes sense too, because then you don't risk having the same board appoint the entire ethics board. Yeah.
Okay.
And then
Do you want to do them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or do you want to have it 2? And because otherwise you're going to have everybody with a. I mean, you could do it either which way you want. As far as the staggered terms.
yeah, I would
1, 2,
I
3,
would do
4,
it every
5.
year, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Just during the appointment season, yeah.
Yeah, and after
We just-
5 years, there'll be some.
Yeah,
It won't be a
they'll
one-
either,
yeah.
they'll be asked if they want to re-up, possibly, and if they do, they do. And then, then the chair would be appointed annually as part of the appointments. That would be a 1 year.
Well,
To serve as chair would be a 1 year.
that's one way you could do it. The Board of Ethics, some municipalities insist that they will appoint the Board of Ethics chair, and sometimes he serves for his full term as or she as ethics chair. Other times it can be done year to year by the village board. Other times they leave the appointment of the chair up to the board and have the Board of Ethics elect its own chair and its own secretary and its own vice chair.
That's interesting.
No need for a treasurer, there's no money.
My thought would be keep it similar to all our other boards and that have it be an annual reappointment from one of the members on the board.
Okey dokey.
Anyone else want to counter that, or?
No.
I agree with you.
Wait, so just to rewind, every year we'll appoint a new person so that, and they have 5-year terms.
So the first,
Well, no.
We'll appoint 5 people.
well, the first time we'll appoint 5 people, 1 for a 5-year term, 1 for
Yeah.
a 4-year term, 1 for a 3-year term. After
Okay.
that,
Yeah, then
And
everybody
then it
gets
goes
5-year term. Yeah.
everybody would get a 5-year term.
Right, so the 1-year person after 1 year would get a 5-year term. the
Yep.
regular person.
Yeah,
And every year, the board would, at its reorganization meeting, appoint one of the sitting members as the
As the chair.
chairperson.
Yeah,
yep,
Got it.
okay,
Sounds good.
right. We done with that?
I think so.
I think so.
Okay, so we won't be introducing this
Tonight.
now. I'll have to make those changes and recirculate.
Thank you.
But I think we're there.
Oh, I think so. I
Yeah.
mean, it's been gone over pretty thoroughly now.
Yeah.
And if we stick to a timeline, will we be appointing an ethics board at the reorg meeting or no?
Probably won't be enough time, but we'll,
We-
send out.
Does it have to be the reorg meeting or can
No,
it
I
be
think we
anytime?
can do it anytime.
We did agree last time that we would remove section O, but that is still in there.
Section O, respectful treatment?
What
Yeah.
was that,
I
Mike?
thought Mary
thing.
wanted respectful treatment.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we
did.
had discussed it
At the work
We were
session,
gonna
yeah.
change the,
because it's
Word.
covered by equal treatment of the public. And it's a behavioral issue, it's not an ethical issue.
Well, I agree with the second part. I'm not sure I agree with the first part. I'm not sure treating people equally is the same thing as treating them respectfully. Because you could be equally disrespectful to everyone.
But that's a behavioral issue. That's a,
I completely agree.
but
with
not
that
an
part,
ethical issue, yeah. So, because I think the reason that O was in there is because, is the idea that you might treat some members of the public disrespectfully, and that you would form a barrier to their engaging in the civic process because of some, you're abusing your power in that way. So with equal treatment of the public, if you're just an unpleasant individual and you're equal opportunity unpleasant, that's a behavioral problem. That's not an ethical issue.
I felt that way from the beginning.
Yes, yeah. So, but that's why we discussed it last time and we did agree to remove O.
Okay, I did not
Yeah, it
know
is
that.
a
I'm
little-
sorry.
Yeah.
We'll take O out too.
Okay. So,
Short-term rentals.
short-term rentals on the block.
All right, so the issue with short-term rentals was the dormant commerce clause matter. And as we discussed last time I was here, what the dormant commerce clause issue is that you were limiting, the way it was written, we're limiting the rental of short-term rentals to owner-occupied properties. And if you have a requirement that the property be owner-occupied, out-of-state owners are not being treated the same as in-state owners, or so the courts have held, as recently as last year, as a matter of fact. So what we tried to do was take out the requirements for owner-occupied properties, and that's the first thing that I did. The next issue that we tackled was the question of an agent and where an agent should be. If you look under definitions for registered resident agent, it says a representative of the property owner who resides within 15 miles of the village. And what I'd suggested was that there's nothing talismanic about 15 miles in particular, unless you want to tie it to time for responses. So if an issue came up, there's a water leak, there was a fire, there was a break-in, someone got in an accident, whatever it is. How long do you feel it should reasonably take for an agent to be on the scene to prevent the issue from becoming something larger? You don't want a house fire, you don't want significant damage to the property, again, somebody's hurt, is there a dangerous condition that needs to be remedied? An hour? Half an hour?
I think
Hour and a half? I mean, and you could kind of tie that, knowing the roads around here, to the amount of travel time that would be involved in it, and then you could rationally say, all right, this is how far. Now you could do that time-wise, or you could do that by mileage, but it's something you're going to want to put some thought into.
I think last time we had talked about 30 minutes maximum, 15 minutes. Because if you had someone on site, then the response time, because you think about this, you're gonna have to call the individual, they're gonna have to mobilize, and then there's the drive time. So if they're 15 minutes max commute time away, it's still gonna be a minimum of probably 30 minutes. And if you had someone on site, like in the case of a bed and breakfast, the response time is going to be faster than 30 minutes.
Yes.
So I wouldn't want to go beyond 30 minutes. I don't think that that's reasonable, but my preference would be 15 minutes.
Yeah, I would like shorter, but I know that that's probably not reasonable.
Response time or drive time?
Drive time, because the
I think it's
response time
response.
is going to be higher.
I think it should be based on response time, you know, because if we just say 15-minute drive time, and they take a half an hour to get in the car, then it's 45 minutes.
I think what
So-
Carly meant was half an hour total time.
Yeah.
So
But from the
that
time I get the
15-minute
call to-
drive time.
So you
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, well, I guess my point was it has to be
30-minute
expressed
response
as a
time.
response time, not as a drive
Total
time.
time.
Okay. That's certainly a rational argument, certainly the type of thing you could defend if somebody said, why 30 minutes? The only thing I would take a little issue with is a bed and breakfast is a different animal than an Airbnb. Bed and breakfast can have multiple guests in it, and you know, they're cooking breakfast for multiple people. If there's a problem with an Airbnb, it's almost like a problem at a small hotel. Obviously, some of them are much smaller than others, but I mean, just as a general concept. So I don't know that I would compare the two. But if you look at, you know, I rented my house or my apartment, whatever, and there's a problem in the house, how much time is reasonable to have the owner's agent on the site to help remedy this? And I think half an hour is defensible as far as that goes. So do you want to change it to drive time? Do you want to pair it to mileage? Or response time? Want to pair it to mileage? How would you like to approach the issue of how far away an agent can be?
I like time better than miles.
Time is more logical than miles.
And that's our goal. Our
Yeah.
goal is to get somebody here quickly.
You're right.
So I think it should be response time. You know, you have to be able to have somebody here within
30 minutes.
30 minutes, 45 minutes.
Okay. You can see on the end of one of the definitions, we took out owner occupied, as I mentioned earlier.
Which, on that note, I don't think we should. I understand your advice. I respectfully disagree with it. There are several dozen in the state who have come before us, who have this in place. To my knowledge, I don't know if it's really been challenged. Who knows if it will in the future. If it does, we can revisit it. But I'm pretty strongly in favor of keeping the owner occupied except for the carve out of the central business district.
Even if we can have an owner's agent on site within a certain period of time. My concern about that is that it seems as though, and this is just taking that documentary that you shared from Goshen, was it Goshen? No, it was Newburgh.
Newburgh.
That Airbnb is specifically targeting regulations and launching lawsuits.
I
So,
could share that with everyone.
so that would be my, if they're specifically searching for folks to sue, that, and we know that this has won in the past, then that would be of a concern to me. I wouldn't want to just put ourselves out there like that.
I agree with what you're saying, Carly, as far as that goes. I just want to be clear. This has not been litigated in New York or in any of the federal courts in New York. The district courts.
Where was it litigated?
Louisiana and Texas. And in both those, they came down the same way. They were higher courts. So, I mean, it's not like it's some district court judge somewhere. It's a 10th Circuit type of thing.
How did it come down?
In favor of the person challenging the requirement. They found the Dormant Commerce Clause does apply to these. But a New York court might rule differently. So if Tom says, I want this in, and I'm aware that there's a chance that there would be a lawsuit, maybe not against us, but maybe against somebody else, if we have to change it. It's not an unreasonable position to take. It's a little more risky position. Well, yeah, but I mean, these are decisions you guys have to make. You're risk averse, or are you willing to take the chance? That's up to you.
So if we were to get sued And
I don't wanna talk about that on open session.
Good point.
I had brought up last time that why can we not have owner's agent on site? Like owner or owner's agent on site. And I think you made that same face and said that that just was not.
That's why you
It's
don't
okay.
face the camera, Steve.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons.
And you had said that that was like not a realistic expectation, but I think it's ultimately the same thing, because if someone has, if we're feeling very strongly about having the owner on site, I think the idea is that you have someone on site in all cases except for the central business district, in which case you could have either the owner or an owner's agent on site. And the
Within-
owner's
within
agent could
15
be
minutes.
15 minutes.
an in-law, it could be whatever.
30 minutes.
Are you saying owner or owner's
Owner
agent
or
within
agent
15-minute
occupied.
response time?
No,
I
I'm saying
misunderstood
for
what
the
you were saying.
residential R2 areas,
Have
that it should be owner occupied.
okay.
And we've talked about this in numerous meetings past of, why I think that should be the case. But in terms of the central business district, there's different expectations given how it's zoned.
So, yeah.
So to allow for more of the agent model in the central business district.
But do you think that both needs could be met if the language was such that it said owner or owner's agent on site for the R2 zoning? And why do you feel like that's not,
I've,
Sorry,
I'm sorry, no, go ahead.
I don't know if it's as much as on site, but with owner occupied, it's their
Yeah, it's
primary
on site.
residence.
Okay.
There's a sense that they have, there's gonna be more private
Responsibility.
ownership. They don't want to befall bad stuff to happen on their neighbors. They live there more than 50% of the year, right? So it's not as much having an agent on site, right? But truly owner occupied in the residential area. Now, in the central business district, a little bit different, because we have B&Bs, right? We have, other commercial entities where it might make a little bit more sense. And if you buy a house to live, and you're living in the central business district, you have a certain expectation of businesses around you. And that's what this is. It's a business. And there's not, to my knowledge, any real vetting that happens on these, short-term rental sites, knowing who's kind of coming in. So I don't think it belongs in a R2 residential area unless it's owner occupied and they are trying to, have some little extra income, but it's their place, right? I don't think on site is the spirit of that.
so you're arguing basically it's a change in zoning of the property if it's not, because it's becoming
it seems
like
a lot like a zoning
small,
issue.
what did you call it? Like a boutique hotel, or like a small boutique hotel, and that is like a different zoning.
So if I could say a couple things real quick. Tom, you're right, but you're a little bit off base saying there'd be their primary residence. It would be a residence, it wouldn't necessarily be their primary one. So if you had somebody who lived in Florida most of the year and then came up here, in the summertime, their Florida residence would be their, what's called domicile. Domicile is your intended home that you will always return to. It's your principal place and it has tax consequences. Residence, I own a house in Cape Cod. Well, I don't. I wish I did, but I mean, I go out there for a couple months in the summer, and that's it. I don't live on Cape Cod.
I respectfully disagree with that, because I could buy a house in Florida and say that's my residence and never go there and just rent it out.
Well, if you said it was owner occupied, it would have to be occupied at least by some time by you. If you bought it and never lived there, it would just be owned. It wouldn't be owner occupied.
Yeah, the language before had a certain amount of months, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I believe
That doesn't mean the owner's on the premises when it's being rented out.
Just,
Right, so, I mean, that's
right,
why
they don't have
I-
to be. They don't have to be
Right.
there hiding in the garage. It could be they go somewhere else for the weekend, but it's their primary residence for 6 months and a day out of the year. The other way to do this is to look at, X number of days per month or per year maximum, right? Because if you say, oh yeah, this is my house, I go there all the time, but you're renting it out every single week, it's an investment property, right? Now, I understand that there are also arguments to be made for how it's bringing people into the village, and it's good things there, but they're running a business. And if it's in the central business district, it's a little different. If it's an R2 kind of back neighborhood residential area that's not zoned for commerce,
What's the difference between the R2 and the central business area? Why are you drawing that distinction?
well, the zoning of it.
Yeah, but-
Right, so residential, there's only so many things that you can do there, typical single-family residences. Versus central business, there's a lot more uses.
Well, let's say like, are apartments allowed in the central business district?
In central business district, yeah?
Yes.
So what if I want to rent out an apartment? Should that be owner occupied too, or no?
No, because it's not in the,
That's the 15-minute rule, or the 30-minute
that's where there
rule.
will be an agent within 15 minutes.
All right, I see those as very different issues. The owner occupancy, as you rightly point out, we've discussed at some length, is to make sure you don't have people who just come up and buy properties and never live in them and just use them as rentals, and, you know, the insurance is gonna take care of it, or I'll have a handyman paint it every year. And we don't care how the people act when they're there, because we don't live in the area, and we don't know the neighbors. So you want to avoid that, so you want to require owner occupancy. And you can discuss the terms of it longer or shorter, or what have you, but that's what the purpose of owner occupancy is. The agent is not there to make sure that people take care of it. The agent is there to make sure if there's a problem, there's somebody around who can come and close up the building if there's a fire, or if there's an accident, make sure that, you know, whatever the dangerous condition is taken care of. So you want the person who's either the owner or an agent within reasonable time to come and respond to taking care of the property, or even respond to complaints about the property. Hey, there's a really loud party, get over here and quiet things down. But the owner occupancy requirement is to make sure that the property is kept in good condition and isn't rented out for crazy
So
parties.
regardless, there should be the owner or the agent within a quick response time, regardless of where it's located. The difference being, if it's an R2 residential area, that it doesn't have the same flexibility as the central business district.
Because of the zoning.
Because
That's
the
your
zone-
argument. It's a different zoning if you're using it purely for commercial purposes.
I'm sorry, I don't understand that. Why would I not have my apartment required to be owner occupied if a house in R2 was required to be owner occupied? Or am I
Because if
misunderstanding?
your apartment's in the central business district, again, it's zoned for that, so you have that expectation of having commercial entities next door to you.
Well,
Beneath you.
Well,
well,
you
for
can't
exa-
rent out in multiple dwellings anyway.
Well, for example, I own a building that my business is in, and there's rooms upstairs, and I want two.
I don't think it could be more than two. I think
Right.
after that, it's multiple dwellings. You
That's
can't-
right. But just to say that, I don't live there, but I own the building.
Okay,
But it's your
you own the building.
properties under an
Or your corporate entity
LLC.
does, or what have you.
Right.
Yeah.
So you wind up in the
Corporate
same
entity.
situation as if it was owner occupied. It's owned, and so you're not gonna let bad things happen to it because, okay. It's a little different than just a house that's owned. Okay.
But
Okay.
also, Steve, it could be a standalone, a single-family residence in the commercial district. And because it's zoned in central business district, the idea is, okay, they could have some short-term rental as long as there's an agent nearby to respond in case of an issue. But it could be several streets over, and you're in more of a quiet residential area where there's no other businesses around. That should be, what I'm saying is that should be owner occupied. Meaning that that's their primary residence. They're probably not gonna be there, right? You're not gonna rent from someone necessarily if they're in the, just, I'll be in that room over there.
Well, that's back to Carly's point. We'll circle around to that eventually, but, like, here's where my concern is, and it's, you know, I'm just trying to understand. From an equal protection standpoint, the law has to treat similarly situated people the same classification.
With no regard to zoning
Well, no,
ordinances.
but that can be grounds to differentiate the two. But it can't just be they're different zones, it has to be, here's why we're treating you differently because of these two different zones. You follow me? So if one's in R1 and one's in R2, and you say R1 you have to be owner occupied, R2 not so, not so, you have to be able to explain, well, why is it that in R2 you don't need owner occupancy when you do in R1? You with me? So here we have a situation where we're talking about R2 properties being required to be owner occupied, but central business properties, even if they're not the 2 apartments above a store, even if it's a standalone single-family home, not requiring to be owner occupied. And I'm trying to understand the reason for differentiating between the two, and I'm just not getting it.
Well, the zoning, so the residential district includes bed and breakfast establishments, which require owner occupancy, but does not allow hotel or motel establishments. The central business district, however, does allow hotel and motel establishments. And an Airbnb, which may or may not have an owner occupied, is more akin to like a mini hotel or motel, right?
Well, how is it more akin in the central business and less akin in the R2?
One is not allowed. It's not allowed in the residential district because it's like a hotel or motel is not allowed in the residential district. But a bed and breakfast is.
So you would base it solely on the zoning?
That's what I'm hearing. I'm interpreting and it makes sense to me. That makes logical sense to me. That the residential zoning is meant for residential, non-commercial activities, whereas the central business district is reserved for kind of more business activities. To purchase a house and treat it as a hotel/motel with no owner occupancy is more of a business activity that belongs in the central business district as opposed to the residential. That's the way I'm interpreting what Tom is saying.
Okay, and if you buy a house in the central business district, don't get mad if someone opens up a business next door to you. If you're in a residential area and someone
You're
just,
not zoned for that.
and someone has an agent nearby who just rents it out every night and just have people coming through, the neighbors in that area, you know, that's not what they sign up for in a residential district.
All right, well, I see your point.
I mean, I think
And
owner
how-
occupied across the board makes sense, but
How does a bed
dormant
and,
commerce in Louisiana and Texas and all that. I don't-
but how does a bed and breakfast not violate the dormant commerce clause? Because that's requiring owner occupancy.
They didn't get into that in either of the decisions as far as that goes. I would think that it has something to do with just the nature of the use. But I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, that's interesting,
Yeah.
right? Because that was the question that I had when you weren't here. Is like, why would we treat like an Airbnb different? Like when a bed and breakfast has those requirements.
And again, I don't want to speculate. I'll just throw this out there. Airbnbs are way more prevalent than true B&Bs, particularly in big cities. I mean, New Orleans is a hotspot for them, as you might well imagine. And so maybe they viewed the residency requirement as being more of a bar to getting into that type of use than it would be to a B&B, because you're going to want to be around a B&B, if not living in it, to take care of your guests, then darn close to it. But I'm speculating.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at our zoning code at the central business district, you know, conditional uses, hotels, motels.
Yeah.
Not permitted, conditional as it were, but it's not the same for,
Yeah. And it's, bed and breakfasts are also conditional only in
Yeah.
the residential. I think the
Same
zoning
as general
argument is
commercial.
logical.
But then if you move forward in that direction, then how would you deal with the Airbnb properties that are not owner occupied that are in residential areas?
They have to be owner
Would they
occupied.
be like,
well,
Grandfathered
that
in.
sorts itself out during the permitting process, I think. And going back to the rest of the code, I mean, I think the most important thing here is that there is going to be a permitting process where there are fire inspections built in. So people aren't bringing guests here, illegally putting up some structure, and then there's a fire and who knows what. So I'm glad we've kind of nailed that down. I think then just, this goes back to the permitting process and who's kind of permitted to do what. And I think it should be tied more closely to zoning. Because a lot of thought has been given to zoning over the years and has to do with the characteristics of a neighborhood versus this phenomenon of people just, you can rent out your house because of a website and it throws decades of zoning and purpose out the window. My personal opinion.
To circle back to having somebody live in the house as an agent or an owner, VRBOs, Airbnbs, people come in and they expect to be introduced to the property by the agent, whoever it is. Sometimes you just pick up the keys and go to it. Here's the coffee maker, here's the microwave, this is how you work the television, the cable and so forth. Here are your rooms, if you have any questions, here's your number, okay? But like I said, sometimes you just go and get the keys and in you go. What you don't expect is, I've rented the house, oh, by the way, there's a small apartment in the basement, and Brother Ben is gonna be down there, Don't worry that the kids are down there sleeping, or
Don't
that the
unlock the
dog might
fridge.
be there.
Sometimes they do
Totally
have those
depends on-
situations in the
There's a
Airbnb,
lot of different, you're absolutely right.
because they rent a room,
But to
you
have it as a
know?
requirement is, well, rent a room's another animal altogether. I'm
Yeah.
talking about just renting an apartment or renting a house. It is not usually the case that someone's on premises when you do that, nor do people want, generally speaking, somebody else on premises when you rent the place.
I think if they advertise
an
it as such,
accessory.
that's.
Oh, no, if you know what
They
you're
wanna rent a
getting
boarding
into,
room and they're
but-
right there, that's different.
So anyway, that's my point.
But they wouldn't be in the accessory dwelling unit. Like, if these are accessory dwelling units that are being rented out, the owner is still on the
No, I
premises.
understand there's the
Yeah.
whole upstairs and maybe there's a basement apartment or maybe there's an upstairs apartment, there's separate entrances or the like. It still is not something that you see generally with your VRBOs, particularly for apartments or something like that. Whole home, maybe, but I mean, when you go to rent a house, you don't expect to have somebody else living there. You just don't. I mean, sometimes, as Tom points out, if it's in the advertisement and it's part of what you're getting into, yeah, of course. But to say this is a requirement, I'm troubled by it.
I agree.
I'm okay with the 15 minutes, but I also I think the zoning argument is totally sound and logical.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
I agree
too.
it's logical. I'm a little concerned that it's thin as far as an equal protection challenge, and I'd like to look into it further with the board's permission before you codify it. But, I won't spend hours and hours. Just let me sleep better at night if you're gonna do this, so.
think it
We've
makes
gone back
sense
and forth
to-
so much.
Yeah, I mean, that was the first thing that came to my mind was equality, and would that put us in harm's way? More so than even the commerce law. So I think it should be looked at carefully.
Yeah, I mean, but how do we not run into that problem? I totally agree. And also, how do we not run into that problem with zoning? Because when you buy a house, or a property, you have zoning associated with your uses. So how do we not run into equality issues with zoning?
Well, different zoning districts may sufficiently differentiate different property owners in terms of an equal protection challenge. Why can I have this big a backyard in one district and a smaller backyard in another district? Because when we did our comprehensive plan, when we did our zoning, we decided that that was a rational way to put together our land development. And that's what your answer is. Here, and again, look, I get the argument now, it makes sense, but we're gonna say in the R2, you gotta be owner occupied to rent out your properties, Airbnb, but in the central business district, you do not. And then we're going to get into an explanation as to why our zoning justifies that type of differential treatment.
Do we have to get that complex? Can we not? Let's say we went in that direction. Could we not refer to the zoning
Oh, you're
code?
not gonna refer to the zoning code. I'm thinking ahead to if he gets sued.
Right, no, but
So-
I'm
so
saying,
let's-
could the short-term rental code, as opposed to kind of being complex and say, you can do this here, you can't do this here, blah, 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 could it reference the zoning code and say, per the zoning code, which requires these activities, and or if you're a bed and breakfast, you must be owner occupied according to state law. The short-term rental code adheres to, you know, the zoning provisions and the way that the state law is set up.
It could be simpler, we just put back in what was stricken, the owner occupied definition, because it captures it except for the second part of the last sentence, right, where it says, so, as used in this chapter, the term owner occupied shall mean a residence in which the record owner maintains as their domicile, in which they occupy their own residence not less than 6 months in the calendar year. In the case of property in the central business zone, the owner or agent shall reside, it says, within 15 miles of the property. Shall reside within and be able to respond in person within 15 minutes of the property. Like
I
that
thought
could
it
be
was
the
half-
cleanest
half
edit.
an hour, but
30
I-
minutes.
Or 30,
Yeah.
sorry, 30 minutes.
And the other thing is, do we really want to keep domicile in there? I mean, as I mentioned before, that's a particular legal term, and it means this is the place you live. It doesn't just mean you own a house, like I said, a vacation home on Cape Cod.
Well, if it's greater than 6 months a year, that is your domicile.
That's
Can you get
evidence
a
of
driver's
your
license in the
domicile.
state of Florida if you live here more than 6 months a year? I don't,
What it takes to get a driver's license in Florida, but
maybe that's a bad example.
I know, yes, you can.
But I think that's intentional and well worded.
I was asking whether you wanted it or not. I wasn't saying take it out.
I like the idea of being thoughtful about this and would be interested in that, looking into that.
Okay.
Not that my opinion matters, but I'm listening, as being an Airbnb and being an avid person of the community, I do Airbnb, and I do like what you put there. It does make sense, because my domicile or whatever is my place of residency, but during that time, I have an apartment locally. So, yes, I am there. The only clause is that if it's a plumbing issue, I'm calling my plumber. You know, I think that's so I think it's good.
Thank you.
Good.
Steve, in any case, it should be reworded to refer to it as central business district and general commercial district. Those are the two names of the,
Understood. Okay, should we move on, or?
Yep.
On page 4, if you look at sub 9 under 115.4, we took out the indemnification and hold harmless requirement. Certificate of liability insurance should be sufficient for that. And we took out the notarized statement, this is number 11, that the short-term rental is owner occupied, and we had 15 miles, we're gonna make that 30 minutes. I would assume you guys want this back in then.
Yes.
and again, the two zones, central business and general commercial.
Good thing.
Well, does anyone have any, I should ask, does anyone have any thoughts on that? I mean, I kind of look at those two things as very similar.
The way the language is, I would go back to the language in the zoning code and,
Or maybe it's just,
seem
actually,
to be-
maybe it's just central business, because it looks like general commercial was carved out at some point in two tiny pockets. I'm looking at the map right now.
Okay.
I think central business is, I think you have that.
Then do we have to add the central business zones in the definitions, or no? Are they sort of self-explanatory?
What was in the code, I think it refers to the zoning code, it's,
Okay.
I think it makes sense.
general commercial does not. Yes, it does, yeah. General commercial and central business district have very similar uses, and they both include the hotels and the motels.
Probably need to include both of them just in case we rezone something GC.
Yeah, they're different sections of the code, so they would have to be listed separately.
Okay, that's easy enough. And lastly, I think, on page 8, we had no presumption of compliance. The idea here was that issuance of a short-term rental permit would not allow a property owner to say, listen, I conform with your building code, I conform with your zoning, look, you've given me a short-term rental permit, which is kind of a far-fetched argument to begin with, to be honest with you. But that was decided to be stricken because you guys had concerns over what that might be interpreted to mean, so I understood it. So that section's out,
Okay,
and that's it.
great.
I'm sorry, I don't think I understood that. Why is it out?
Well, I gotten an email from, I think it was Barry, afterward of the meeting, saying that we have concerns over what this might be construed as meaning, and that you were unhappy with the language and that you wanted it out. I told you it was supposed to be.
Oh, this says that if you get the does this imply that if you get the inspection, then that does not presume you're compliant with
Anything else.
anything else? Okay.
Other codes do have this section. But I'm telling you, it's not a big deal one way or the other. Even if someone came in and said, here's my short-term rental permit, don't you see, I don't have a fire code violation. You have your building inspector say, oh yes, you do. There it is. This is not getting you off the hook for that. And I'm really not afraid of facing that type of argument in Justice Court or Supreme.
Yeah, because it's
They're-
not a carte blanche. It's like at this point in time you were in compliance. If
Yes.
you
Well,
fell
they-
out later, then you fell out.
Or if you overlooked something, they can't rely on that by
Mm-hmm.
virtue of the fact that you got a short-term rental provision. The building inspector goes through, he misses that there isn't a smoke alarm on the second floor. They find out there's not a smoke alarm on the second floor because somebody comes and complains. The property owner is gonna be hard pressed to say, wait a minute, I comply, here's my short-term rental permit.
Right.
The building inspector is gonna go in and say, there's no smoke alarm there, you gotta put it in.
Yeah.
So I'm not really concerned. You can leave this in if you want, you can take it out if you want. This is not an operative provision of this. As I said, in other codes, it may not be right for you.
I don't really fully understand the reason why we took it out. Could somebody just back up that?
I got an email from Barry, I believe it was Barry, and it said, we're concerned about the language in this section and what it might be interpreted to mean in terms of compliance with the code. I gotta be honest with you, I kinda got the impression that you felt that it implied that issuing a short-term rental permit somehow indicated that all code compliance required by this was assured. And you didn't wanna be in a situation where the building inspector had looked and they said, hey, everything's in compliance, you don't have a problem, and then they were cited later and they said, well, now you're stopped from doing that because you told me already it was. But that was just my interpretation. I
I think
promise
it's
you, I
a-
didn't just take this out on my own,
I think it's okay to keep in, is my opinion.
however you guys want.
Barry, do you wanna, since you wrote the email?
Wait a minute, I'm alleged to have written the email. Nobody's proved that to me yet.
Yeah, sorry. The alleged.
Allegations only.
Okay.
It seems like it's
100%.
neither here nor there, right? Like it's, because if it's not there, you know, people get permits all the time. It doesn't mean they're perpetually in compliance
That's
with the
right.
code. But
But this kind of backs it up, you know, at least,
Yeah.
so.
like a reminder, you need
Reminder.
to stay in compliance with the code. Yeah, I don't.
I have no
don't have
problem
strong
with it doing
feelings
that.
either way.
Yeah.
Against it.
I mean, I don't, maybe I sent too many emails on the ethics law and you're confusing me with another one, but I don't see where I had, you'd sent someone the short-term rental.
It wasn't me that. I could see the C and the Y, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess, and one of the issues that I've had all along with this, not just the short-term rental, but the fact that the only place we require an entity disclosure is, I believe, a planning board application. So if somebody comes as an applicant that's not an individual, we have, with the exception of the planning board where we have a form, no other requirements to disclose who the ownership is of an LLC or corporation or anything, not an individual. And so I think that we either need that kind of a disclosure law that covers everything, or we need to include in this and all our other laws the requirement that they complete, that form be completed. You're not following me, Steve.
So I'm a corporation or an LLC, and I buy a house in the village of Warwick,
Yes.
corporately. You want to have a disclosure form saying who the stockholders or the members are?
5%, more than 5% of the,
And the purpose of that is what?
so that we know who we're dealing with.
What difference does it make who you're dealing with? Oh, in terms of the owner occupancy?
Of
Just
Any
disclosing
application for
who's behind an
anything.
LLC for anything. That makes sense to me.
Do I
Monroe
have to grant
has,
the permit whether they are an LLC or a corporation or not? I mean, what does it make who the stockholders are? Or the members are? I mean, you put you on the spot, I'm just asking.
well, I want to know. Don't I have the right to, as a municipality?
Well, one example
for it,
comes to
sure.
mind if someone has several violations and they get it revoked, they have 10 other LLCs under different names.
Okay.
There's also the disclosures, it's also the code of ethics that would also support like adherence to the code of ethics.
Wait a minute, we're talking short-term rentals. What does the code of ethics got to do with it?
Because if, like, let's say I get an LLC and I have not disclosed that on my form, and then I go and I make an application. I think the other one's stronger, I'm just
So it
saying.
covers a belt and suspenders thing? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
All right.
That's a good
but I agree with the violations, I think that's a really good
Well,
point.
we're on corporations. How does the owner occupancy apply to, you gotta be a shareholder or a member living in the property in order for that corporately owned house to qualify as a short-term rental? Is that how this is gonna work? You follow me, right? I mean, if you're.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean,
gotta be
well, how would it work
owner-occupied if
now?
I'm in the R2.
So do I then, if I create an LLC and there's no requirement for disclosure, who lives there? How do you know who lives there?
That's a good point. So, but going back to and another reason why the disclosure form would be acceptable. But going back to how do I satisfy the owner occupancy requirement if I'm a corporation or an LLC? It's shareholders or members who have to live there? Is that has to be their domicile? I mean, you can write that in, I just
yeah,
wanna
I mean,
make
I-
sure that I understand it, because we're gonna have to write in a provision on that.
Yeah, I don't know how you tackle that one.
Well, I mean, if I own the corporation and the house is my domicile, I
Right.
think the requirement's satisfied right then and there. Same thing if it's an LLC and I'm a member.
What about a living trust?
I know, the beneficiary has to preside there, I guess, I don't know.
One
The
of
beneficiary
Of the
or
trust.
the person
Who created the trust.
Who created the trust?
Or maybe either.
Just someone
Would satisfy it.
affiliated, yeah. It's really about transparency, right? Like that's,
Yeah.
that's the issue, it's not about. And so you're also proposing that anytime someone submits a permit request to the village, the
That disclosure.
the disclosure would be required.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Have we run into issues like that before, where people have violations and they submit under different LLCs?
Well, no, but it's pretty plausible. I mean, if I've got problems, one of the reasons I would want
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty quick workaround.
I would say the potential exists because there are owners of LLC properties that are different, but under the same ownership. It's not too well hidden, but it could be well
Yeah.
hidden if they wanted it to be.
Yeah.
Or you could have multiple owners of a corporation or an LLC members, and one of them could be a bad actor and the other one's not so much, you know? But just the fact that you know that the one is involved would be enough. Of course, I don't know. Well, do we have, I don't think there's a provision in here saying that you don't get a permit if you have other violations, is there?
Yes.
There is?
Yeah,
Okay.
there was, I thought.
don't
I
recall
thought
that.
there was. Let's look at that. Because it's the same thing with the film code. The film code, I think, has that language in it. That you can't have,
It may be in here, Carly, I just
Yeah.
don't remember.
I might also just be conflating, but if it's not, it should be.
Here we go, denial of short-term rental. No, I don't even say there. Suspension?
I mean, if we have it in the film code, we should have it in this.
Could you pass that down to Steve, please? So this is the form that I believe is part of the building permit. Application.
Yeah, get the job done.
Do we need, I guess,
I think you just listed in the application part, though. I don't know that you need a separate form for it. There's a list of requirements.
right, 115.5?
4, I think.
4, 115.4,
Yeah,
yeah.
you could just tack it on there. You could use a separate form if you want to really zero in on it. But the point is that it gets required. I'm not seeing it. Maybe I'm just overlooking it.
Yeah, I can't see it either, so we
But
should
certainly
add
there
it in
should be a
there.
provision in here to that effect.
So 115.4I.
Name, mailing address, telephone number, email address of the owner and agent.
Yeah, and what I was suggesting that to add to that, if the owner is other than a person, in other words, a LLC or a trust, then provide the noted information for each person with 5% or greater ownership.
Do you remember off the top of your head what the film permit section says as far as disqualification?
I can open.
Here's the expert.
Yeah, I'll open it. I think it just says you cannot, I think it says something to the effect that a permit cannot be issued until violations are resolved. Or
Oh,
a
you mean-
permit cannot be issued until, like, in the case that there are
All right, that
violations
would
or
be
something
fine.
to that effect.
That's just, you know, are we barring them forever, are we barring them for a year, depending on the nature of the, or is it just you can't get?
You gotta settle it.
Short-term rental until you
Yeah.
resolve any outstanding.
That's how it was with
Easy
the,
enough to import that if it's, and I don't think it's in here now.
yeah, I'll put it
I
in.
hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
All right, so that's gonna require some additional work.
Yeah, no filming may take place on a property with open zoning code, building code, property maintenance, and/or fire code violations.
So this would apply to anybody who has more than a 5% interest in any of these. If you're a property owner and you have a different property that has outstanding violations, whether it's zoning, building, whatever it may be, you don't get a new short-term rental permit, even if there's 95% other owners, until the outstanding violations are cleaned up. That's where we're going?
For that property.
For the property that they seek the new one for, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's unreasonable, by the way, as far as, you know, issuing these permits. It not only helps avoid problems going forward, it'll also help you clean up outstanding violations, so. If the other owners don't like it, they should lean on the guy who's the problem.
Self-enforcement.
I like it a lot better than paying for it.
Yeah.
So,
One of the other questions I had was, it didn't seem, or I couldn't find where there was a fine for operating without a license.
let's take a look.
There were fines for violations.
Well, operating without a permit would be a violation, wouldn't it? I mean, permit's required, so it's a
Okay.
violation of provision of this chapter.
Okay. So we don't have to do anything special relative to that.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, off-street parking,
Where are you?
I think 115.4. That, doesn't really specify.
Wouldn't that be associated with the zoning though? The off-street parking requirements, wouldn't they be associated with the building and the,
Well, let's say you got a variance and that you don't have any off-street parking as a result of that. Or that you have a driveway that will only accommodate 2 cars and maybe your garage is full of stuff, you know?
And if you've got a 4-bedroom house, or if you've got a, you know, I mean, that potentially could be 4 cars. And if there's not enough space to accommodate for 4 cars, then should that be a restriction that we'd wanna have them have to comply with?
I don't know, cause it seems, to me that seems duplicative of the existing code though, right? Because it's like, this is the way it's written, and it's actually, I think it's written as like maximum versus minimum in the code, cause it's trying to help people transition away from having huge amounts of parking, that's the way I read it. But like, if they have a 4-bedroom house, then that, they would have the amount of parking that's associated with their zoning already for that
With a 4-bedroom
amount of
house,
bedrooms, yeah.
which is basically a 2 or 3 car garage, right?
Yeah, but why would we need it in here though? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Because if you've got a situation where you have more bedrooms than what you would anticipate the number of cars that would be traveling there to spend time, that they're then gonna spill over into the street. And if you're in a residential area, and that seems to be, you know, a concern, then you're creating an imposition on that area that you wouldn't necessarily see with it just being a normally occupied house.
Yeah, the issue comes up really a heck of a lot more when parties are thrown. I mean, it's often the case that you rent out the house and, you know, mom and dad are there and their son and his girlfriend are there, or, you know, their aunt and uncle are there, whatever it is. So you got 3 couples, so there's 3 cars, and 2 of them fit in the driveway and one of them's parked down the street. It's not the end of the world. But they decide that they're gonna have the bachelorette party there, or they're gonna have the summer family get-together there. They rent the house, and the next thing you know, this has happened. I'm not making this up.
yeah.
yeah.
You know,
We know.
there's 25 cars, and they're parking in front of other people's driveways, and it's a big problem. How you would deal with that in terms of a once-a-year permit, though, I'm not sure, because the person renting out the property is gonna say,
But isn't
I
that,
rented it out to these 2 people, and how can I help who they invite over? What do you want from me? I showed my driveway's got enough space for 2 cars on it, and there's on-street parking, it's ample here. You know, I mean, I don't know how the billing department, when they process this, is gonna say, wait a minute, you got a problem.
Should we, in answer to that, should we have a special requirement that if there's going to be any kind of an event, that it would require, a party or an event, that it would require, a permit issued by the village board?
But do we have to do that? We don't have to do that generally though, right? Like homeowners or
No.
rental properties
No.
or
But
hotels.
then
or-
again,
Block parties.
your,
Block- Do we have to do a block party?
you have you're commercializing, as Thomas said, you're commercializing a piece of property. When you commercialize it, what are the limits and the restrictions in terms of the impacts you're creating? And so if you require another level of permit for a party or an event that would be drawing more than the people who are staying there to the property, then, that's something that's protective of the neighborhood.
Yeah, you get into line drawing at that point, though. I mean, you rent a place and, you know two couples in the area and you invite them over for a backyard cookout, that's one thing.
Right.
You have the you got 6 people over maybe coming over. You have the party, which has 20 people coming over, it's something else again. But if you're talking about writing something into your code to say we want to get the second one, we want to have regulation over that, I should say, over where 20 people are coming in, where do you draw the line? Is it 6? Is it 10? Is it 15? At what point does it become more like a mass gathering is the wrong term, but a gathering, as opposed to just ordinary use of the property for a party?
If you've got 4 bedrooms and 8 beds, it should be 8 people. And how many does it sleep?
Yeah, but if they're just coming over as guests, you're still gonna limit it to 8 people.
Well, then maybe there should be an allowance for 50% guests.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think that these issues though are covered by other parts of the code, right? Because
Okay.
we have noise ordinance, we have peace and good
Parking.
order.
That's all after.
ordinance.
That's all after the fact.
We have, but I guess, I don't know. I don't know that I understand. So going back to the 4 goals, we have the safety and building code situation, we have noise, nuisance, and garbage, which I think you're kind of getting at. Support in the case of issues and the housing inventory. And I think zoning is like flowing into there. But I think like having a big party, those are like dealt with in other ways. And the code does say if you have more than 200 people coming, you have to notify the village.
One hell of a party.
That's a big party. I was like,
It's a big party.
that'll be my block
I
party.
don't know how it works, I don't know if it helps. I
Go
know in
ahead.
my situation, I am in a residential area, I really do care about my neighbors. I've created a site map, a parking site map. There are individuals that are okay with parking on the street is public parking, but there are individuals that are, handicapped or whatever, that on my site map, it shows not to park in front of their house or this or that. Again, your site map could be outside of the area, but again, I'm not saying this is the right, but it's a
Well,
big gray
yeah.
area for everybody.
And that, I think, is a good move on your part and says you're a responsible individual. Not everybody that we're gonna give a permit to necessarily will be a responsible individual.
I agree 100%. But it is still public parking on the street.
Oh,
That's what
yeah,
I was trying-
yes, yeah. But again, even without the Airbnb or short-term rental issue, there are still complaints if your neighbor throws a party that's too loud or too
Why
late.
you invite them to the party?
Yeah, that's usually what happens, but.
But it would be difficult as a property owner renter to understand if your property is being rented and a party is being thrown. Like, I feel like that would
You
be
may not
hard
know.
to
You're
control
absolutely
or
right.
to know.
But if we had that provision, it would then be the responsibility of the permit holder to inform their guests that there is this provision, and if they intend to need to enact it, they need to do this, this, and this.
And what would be the this, and this?
Well,
Have a-
I would say, we can decide, the suggestion I threw out initially, take it to the highest court, which is the village board, get a permit from the village board, approve it from the village board.
How are you gonna police that?
Building
After the
inspector.
fact,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm wondering, because, I mean, there's parties,
All the time.
So I guess my
There's-
point is the board to determine if someone's allowed to have a party at the house, or
Yeah, that's-
a kid party, or.
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like that's overstepping and that there's other
Yeah.
code provisions to support
Right.
that.
And trust me, I favor the restrictions and things like that. I do run a very clean operation, and I do welcome that. But there's places, how do you police certain things? And I think that's been the trouble. I think that's why you guys are having this meeting, actually. So good.
And it would be on the homeowner, right? Like if there was a big giant party and there was trash dumped in the streets and like then that,
I mean, that's,
What is that?
grounds for revoking the
Yeah.
permit.
right.
How does the town have anything in their short-term rental code that deals with this, Tom? I know you were familiar
Yeah, I
with
don't-
the town code.
I don't know if they do.
Well, and doesn't our code, our short-term rental code, just like we did this with the film code as well, is we said, the permittee must comply with XYZ and all other provisions of the code, right? Like you should specifically look at these pieces of our code rather than, because that was one of the things we did was we streamlined it by deleting any duplication. And we just said, you can look at these other parts of the code, but you also must comply with all the code. That's fine. It probably would be helpful to any short-term rental person just to know which parts of the code they should be specifically familiar with too, right?
So where are we, guys?
Someone has their hand up.
Oh, hello. Okay.
I mean, I just got here a little late to the party, so to speak. However, what about some sort of a three strikes you're out kind of thing if the police are called to these short-term rentals and you say, okay, we've had a violation, now we've had another complaint and another complaint. I mean, is that something that you guys might entertain?
We
Yeah,
do have penalties for
There are
offenses in
penalties
here,
in there,
yeah.
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 Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your input. Hi, John.
Hey.
John, we're in a work session and we're almost done, so we'll start the next.
Well, if I could make a suggestion, you've given me quite a bit already to write into the revised, which I'm happy to do. Short-term rental law. Just kind of mull over this issue of parking, excessive parking, and whether you want to get into attempting to regulate the size of gatherings at short-term rentals. And when you look at the revisions that I send you, you can bring up the issue again after you've slept on it and thought it over. If you want to add another provision, I mean, it's taken so long writing it up already, I don't think one more meeting is going to make a big difference in terms of enacting this. So don't have me write it up now. It just opens a can of worms. Have me write up what you've given me, and we can discuss it further at the next board meeting.
Yeah, maybe what we should look at is whether we feel like all of those concerns are adequately covered in the code, and if not, then maybe those are the things that we bring in.
That sounds like a plan.
Okay.
That was a good session.
It
It
was a good
was, yeah.
session.
Thanks, Steve.
Yes, thank you.
Motion to adjourn the work session?
That would be a
So
nice thing.
moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Okay.
Is
Oh,
that
I
document
do.
online?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, it's under, if you go to the website and you go under agendas and minutes, and it will be the work session agenda for March 18th.
Oh, cool.